and the Land Conservancy of West Michigan. I could keep going forever, but in the interest of time, just help me welcome John Jellema.
Thank you all. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. First of all, good luck to Barry in Oklahoma. Dale, enjoyed the poem you wrote. Kirsten, if it were my Rotary to run, I'd listen to you instead of me. But today you're going to listen to me, I guess. I want to start by applauding the Rotary Club and the work that you do here in the community, also in Honduras, and I think India was referenced. I don't know whether you're involved in that project, but to find an organization that works in the community and has an impact. Quick example, my kids growing up skied at Mulligan's Hollow, and the last 2 years, my grandkids are now skiing at Mulligan Hollow, same slopes. So because of that, because of what you do, it really is an honor to be here. Rotary has a good set of questions. They are, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Excellent set of questions, and I'm going to try to honor those as I talk to you today. Like I think most of you, my preference would be not to do this in Zoom. I'd much rather be seeing you face to face. And I want to warn you, I'm going to be referring to notes just because there's a lot that I want to make sure that I get right. So first, you should know that I'm a member of the Grand Haven Energy Organization. The Grand Haven Energy Organization, there's been some misleading information, I would say, about the GHEO. We are all volunteer. There's a core group of about 25 of us who are doing most of the work. Core group includes me, 2 former mayors, a former city manager, 2 former city council. So members, you know, we're doing the legwork. There's over 350 people who support what we're doing. Most of them are residents of Grand Haven and the Board of Light and Power service area. How are we being funded? We are an all-volunteer organization. We have raised small donations, total of between $1,500 and $2,000. The Sierra Club and the West Michigan Environmental Action Committee are providing some in-kind help, and that's been questioned. But actually, when I think about what their aims and goals are, environmentally speaking, I'm pleased to have them being, you know, at least in the background. The values of the GHEO, we share a deep appreciation for our homes, for this waterfront community, and for our environment. We also appreciate our public electric utility, the Board of Light and Power, which is, in effect, a department of the city of Grand Haven, and which has a long history in Grand Haven of great employees and great service. Their transition from being a producer of energy with a Sims plant to a distribution organization buying energy from the grid, we think has been a great thing. The Board of Light and Power currently contributes 5% of its gross revenues. That's about $1.7 million to the city's general fund. So the Sims plant used to supply almost all of the energy that we needed. As that plant got older, in recent years, it was often cheaper for the Board of Light and Power to buy power from the grid, from the market, instead of generating it at Sims. And since February of 2020, the Board of Light and Power has purchased all of its energy from the grid, the Michigan Public Power Agency, MPPA. So I want to make clear at the outset, we in the Grand Haven Energy Organization do not consider the Board of Light and Public Power as a public enemy. We view it as a public utility, and because they're a public utility, you know, we think they should be responsible to the community they serve, and that means answerable to its ratepayers. We all recognize that Harbor Island is a prominent part of our local environment. The issue we're going to be discussing, the Board of Light and Power and the future of Harbor Island, the future of energy, the future of Grand Haven, the future that we want for our grandkids, we think, is the most significant to face Grand Haven in several decades. And I'll do my best to explain why that is. So when I think about the Board of Light and Power in Harbor Island, I realize that it's often presented as a single issue, or sometimes only one part of the issue is presented. Each of the items I'm going to present to you today represents money that the Board of Light and Power has already spent or money that it proposes to spend. So I'm going to start with public relations because the Board of Light and Power has hired a public relations firm using ratepayer money, and it's connected to the Board of Light and Power plan for Harbor Island. So the background. Last spring, some of us became aware of the Board of Light and Power's plans and began calling for wider public discussion. We reached out to the City Council, presented a petition signed by more than 250 people, collected, by the way, signatures collected during COVID. The petition asked that the city take a second look at the plan and consider alternatives. The council, in effect, said, thank you, you really need to work with Board of Light and Power. So why does the Board of Light and Power need a public relations firm? I think there are two answers. Their website really needed some updating. And if you go to their website and take a look at it, it's much slicker than it used to be. And the inserts they send with your bill, those are much better. They're color and glossy, and I like them. So they needed some help. They hired a public relations firm, but they also needed help to promote their plans for Harbor Island. They offered some opportunities for the public to come in and discuss the plans. The public didn't really take advantage of them. So when we did, we presented the petition, got sent back to Board of Light and Power. We offered Board of Light and Power to help them facilitate some public forums. They declined. We proceeded with the plan and organized 3 of the public forums. We invited Board of Light and Power to participate. Again, they declined, although they did attend one of the forums. Following that 3rd community forum and some disappointing results from their own public opinion survey, the Board of Light and Power voted 3-2, and that's going to be a vote you're going to hear again and again as we go through this. They voted 3-2 to hire Boyaloo Communication Management for $48,000. It's to promote their gas-fired plant. The PR firm has worked on the image and is in charge of promoting Board of Light and Power's plans for the new construction. So you're going to be, me as ratepayers, we're going to be hearing more from the public relation firm / Board of Light and Power in the coming weeks. So I'm going to move ahead. Unfortunately, I don't see anything on the screen. I had hoped to be able to pull this stuff up for you. I'm going to start, if part 1 is the public relation firm, just kind of quickly in passing, there's 8 parts that I'm going to talk about. Okay, I see this is an example of what on the screen you should be seeing, an example of what the public relation firm has done for the Board of Light and Power. So they're using language that should resonate with people living in Grand Haven now. They talk about we're moving away from the Sims plant into a technology-focused community with advanced distribution and a diverse, sustainable portfolio of power sources. Well, that's good news for me, but we're going to see how much of that they really mean. So if we can pull up the slide of the City Council resolution, that's part 2. The City Council, in 2013, Board of Light and Power hired a consulting firm called Black & Veatch. So there's another spending opportunity, who recommended that the Sims plant be decommissioned. Since the Board of Light and Power is in effect a department of the city, they needed city permission before they could do that. 2018, the Grand Haven City Council unanimously authorized Board of Light and Power to decommission the Sims plant if they would continue to generate a majority of local electricity, and if there is capacity to partner in the support of the snowmelt system. So it's an important step, and it gives the Board of Light and Power authority to close the Sims plant with a proviso that you can do that, but you have to continue to supply the majority of energy, electrical energy. So following that, after Black and Veatch, they hired another consultant called Burns and McDonnell. It's a nationally respected consulting firm, and in their 2019 to the Board of Light and Power, Burns and McDonnell agrees that they should not try to rehab Sims, which was one of the options. Instead, they say, buying all your power from the grid is the lowest cost option. Yeah, even though if you choose that one, there's a risk that you may face potential rising prices in energy. Another alternative is building a 36 megawatt plant, which would be large enough to provide a majority of the local electricity, which was suggested by the council. That's a higher cost option, but it is viable as well. Burns and McDonnell also said the Grand Haven Board of Light and Power should continue to investigate the definition of the project and reflect on the priorities of the community. They should hit pause on the reciprocating engine development, the power generation on Harbor Island, and take time to further vet costs associated with the power generation component and determine what is the right amount to have locally. Well, Board of Light and Power, Burns and McDonnell recommend a pause, and which is a term that the Grand Haven Energy Organization is also promoting. They should pause and confirm whether Board of Light and Power's continued use of Harbor Island for utility purposes is in the best interest of the city. This is from their own consultant. Well, Board of Light and Power instead hired, for a little more money again, a firm called PEC. And this is kind of interesting. All of you who have been involved in building a new house or putting on an addition or whatever you tell your builder, this is what I want. The builder is not going to talk about all the other things you could do. The builder will say, oh, well, okay, if that's what you want to do, here's what you're going to run into. So take a look at the slide that's up there. And the first part of it, the PEC firm, in describing all their recommendations, begins with, it is the Grand Haven Board of Light and Power intent to retain and redevelop the portion of the site where Sims was. So you tell your consulting firm, look, it's our intention, we're going to be there. You tell us what we can do. So what did PEC recommend? Before we get to that slide, PEC recommended, they say this: it will likely not be economical to dispatch the power units that are being proposed for pure electrical generation except on peak days with energy pricing above $50 per megawatt hour, to be accurate. While this will serve as a benefit in hedging power prices during hot summer days, savings in energy is minimal, and the project should be justified by its capacity evaluation alone. They go into, you already have the property on Harbor Island. You could move ahead relatively low cost of debt based on the issuance of municipal bonds. and the fact that a third-party investor rate of return is not generally considered. The disadvantage is the economies of scale, because projects that are generally larger than 12 megawatts have the capacity to lower the overall equivalent capital and operating cost. And this is the key part. PEC cannot conclude with certainty that it is more economical for the Board of Light and Power to build capacity versus purchase capacity over the next 30 years. So put that in different words, PEC is saying, you know, you can build this plant, but we can't say that you're going to save a whole bunch of money doing that. It might be cheaper to continue to buy everything from the grid. So their conclusion, based on their analysis, it is reasonable to conclude that the Board of Light and Power can construct capacity in a competitive manner to market-based capacity based on the existing published rate data. So in other words, if the cost of energy goes up, maybe you're going to save some money. If the cost of energy doesn't go up, well, you can at least be competitive if you want to move ahead with this, which is what you told us you wanted to do. So I want to be fair about things, because that was one of the Rotary questions at the beginning. When Mr. Walters was hired, he inherited, to be honest with you, he inherited a mess. And he was stuck with the situation and in effect asked to clean that up. So I'm going to quote to you from the November 23 board minutes. This is the quote. The general manager informed the board of the GHBLP. Informed the board that the GHBLP was supposed to set aside money each year of the SIM's expected life to fund future plant demolition and remediation efforts, but that did not occur. So this is what, unfortunately for him, this is what Mr. Walters now has to deal with. So he's saying to the board, I'm going to continue quoting from the minutes, "We are now required to include these costs on the balance sheet as an unfunded liability. The options going forward include either paying these costs with cash, paying by way of a short-term loan, or to include them as part of the project on Harbor Island if the board approves moving forward. The board will need to determine how these expenses will be funding if a project is not approved during a future meeting." So these costs, the cleanup cost estimated to be somewhere around 13.2 million, are an unfunded liability, very similar to future pension costs that appear as liability on many organizations' balance sheets. Does spending $28 million on a new plant and operations and tech center and a snowmelt heat source, all on Harbor Island, so that Board of Light and Power can roll in the 13.2 million that it ought to have in the bank right now, makes sense? I want to talk about that. So before we move ahead, summarize for you. Part one, I'm told you they hired a public relation firm, $48,000. Part two, we looked at the city council resolution, asking them to telling them to generate a majority of electricity here and partner in snowmelt. Part three, recommendation by the consultants that were hired by Board of Light and Power. Burns and McDonald says buying power from the grid is the lowest cost option, and they advise a pause to reconsider what Board of Light and Power is moving ahead with. PEC says there's no guarantees it's more economical to build than to buy from the grid. Well, instead of a pause, we get a push from the Board of Light and Power to implement their intention to build on Harbor Island, get bond funding so they can retain and redevelop. That's their intention. And thus finance 13.2 million needed to demolish Sims and clean the thing up. And by a 3-2 vote, the board moved to move ahead with their plan. So we're going to look next at the other parts of the plan. What are they proposing for this expenditure? RICE, they talk about RICE. RICE is a reciprocating internal combustion engine. What's being proposed is a 12.5 megawatt, not 36 megawatt. Why is that important? Because 12.5 does not provide the majority of electricity locally. Remember, the board was told by the city council, tear down Sims, but you got to produce the majority of power here. Well, 12.5 megawatts is not going to do that. It will, in theory, shave the cost of buying supplemental. So they're going to move ahead with their plan. Here's another expenditure, $350,000 to hire Progressive AE to go ahead and put some plans together. They also commissioned, another expenditure, a firm called Great Blue in 2019 to do a customer satisfaction survey. About half of the residential customers and half of the commercial customers, just over 53.6 for the residential, 52.8 for the commercial, reported, said that it is important to them to replace Sims with local generation using natural gas as fuel. So here's what's been happening. Since last February, they're purchasing all of its power from the grid. They pre-purchase anticipated amounts of power capacity from the grid. But during a peak of usage, the 12.5 Rice peaker plant they'd run that to produce their own power and thereby shave the cost of buying additional power from the grid if it was needed. So the Board of Light and Power is kind of betting that the price of electrical energy and electrical capacity will go up dramatically. If it doesn't, as PEC noted, the projected return on investment may not materialize. So if 36 megawatt plant is the size that's needed minimally to produce the majority of energy locally, why build a 12.5 megawatt? Well, the Board of Light and Power has said, took a look and we right-sized the plant for this community. In truth, the size of the 12.5 megawatt plant being proposed was largely determined by what the gas line that runs out to Harbor Island will support. The gas line will not support a 36 megawatt plant. It will only support a 12.5 megawatt plant. The Board of Light and Power argues that this 12.5 megawatt Rice units could also be run for snowmelt. You might wonder whether it could power the city. The 12.5 megawatt plant can only supply a fraction of the energy that our community needs. So in the event of a grid outage, which is highly unlikely, the grid is thought to be 99 point something or other safe and effective. But in the event that there's a grid outage, the 12.5 megawatt could be operated to supply some electricity to the distribution circuits, but there is not a separate dedicated circuit serving only critical facilities. Circuits could be supplied on a rotating basis, or if you will, rolling blackouts.
Hey, John.
Yes.
Just a little heads up. We try to end at 1 o'clock, so have another 5 minutes to continue talking. Then we'll have time for a little bit of Q&A on the back end.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yep.
There's just so much information.
Yep. Sorry to rush you.
No, it's okay. It's not a problem. Key piece of information. You're going to spend, if we move ahead with this, we're going to spend $18 million for a plant that will sit idle for roughly 90 to 95% of the year. They moved ahead. They hired an architect. Is this site ready? And the answer, can they go ahead and build tomorrow? The answer is no. They're going to have to spend additional money to run sewer and water out to the island. It doesn't exist. You can't put an office building out there. So they would have to run additional. So there's an additional expenditure. Part of what they're proposing, you can see here, is a tech center office building. Here's a little factoid for you. According to the May 24, 2018 Tribune, the Board of Light and Power spent $3.3 million to upgrade their current office building and storage on Eaton Drive. So another expenditure for you if you're keeping track of this. So here's a question. Does the tech center office building need to be there to operate the proposed peaker plant? And the answer is no. That can be operated remotely. It's what Zeeland does. It's what Holland does. And it's what a place like Provo, Utah, which also has a 12.5 peaker plant, does. Utah operates theirs from 20 miles away. So they don't need to be adjacent. And if they were built next to each other, my understanding is there would have to be a special blast wall constructed between the two buildings. You see them here, they're connected. That's additional money. In case one of the RICE units were to explode, there has to be a blast wall. So I'm going to skip ahead to the downtown snow melt. This is the sixth part that we've talked about. Snow melt is valuable to the community. Everybody wants to see it continue.
Hey, John, I'm going to interrupt you one more time. I got a couple messages that say people would like to hang around and hear you talk about it a little bit more, because what you're sharing here is has an interest by a lot of people. So I think what we'll do is just keep rocking and rolling like you're going, and then individuals that have obligations to be to at 1 o'clock or shortly after can leave, and then you can continue presenting and people can hang around and listen a little bit more.
Okay, well, the people who are listening will be glad to know I myself have to leave at 1:30. I have to be in Grand Rapids. I appreciate your thought that I'm rocking and rolling. It doesn't feel that way. There's just so much information. But I will thank you very much, and I will continue. This fall, the Board of Light and Power spent $1 million of your money to purchase boilers that are, you can see out on Harbor Island now, that operated this winter. What are we, 4 months maybe out of the year? And so, like some of the Board of Light and Power's own consultants, we don't believe providing a snow melt heat source ought to dictate building a 12.5 megawatt plant on Harbor Island. They say, well, if we have this peaker plant out there, we could shave our cost, and in terms of snow melt, we could save maybe $75 million a year in the cost to operate. If you're a downtown merchant, ask yourself whether spending $18 million makes sense to save $75 a year, $75,000 a year. There's an interesting slide I'm going to get to in a second. So in 2013, Black and Veatch, you remember them? The first consultant we talked about. The Black and Veatch said the snow melt. This is their advice to the Board of Light and Power. Snow melt systems should not drive the plant decision. In other words, the tail should not wag the dog. In Burns and McDonald in 2018 said, a snowmelt system for 3 city blocks should not be used to decide dispatching of power supply resources for 14,000 industrial, commercial, and residential customers. And no matter what else gets decided, those boilers that are currently installed on Harbor Island are going to have to be uninstalled, moved from their current location, and reinstalled in a new location. So here's a couple of kind of off the wall what if things to think about. What if we separate this snow melt from the consideration of Board of Light and Power? What if we took it out of their hands? What if we had a committee that included downtown merchants and some others, formed to look at alternatives. Are there alternatives including funding for the snowmelt? What if the city council, and that's this slide, the heavy line you see is where the snowmelt, approximately where the snowmelt comes in. You can see it's on Chinook, the Chinook Pier area. What if city council decided those snowmelt boilers that were already purchased could be uninstalled on Harbor Island and reinstalled on the downtown side of the river, where the pipe enters and is close to snowmelt? Doesn't have to go under the river and lose some of its heat. It could be right there. It would only require about a 25 by 25 foot building. Wouldn't be an eyesore, could be tucked away. You can see parking lots and so on. The point is, there are other alternatives that really need to be explored. And again, that's the reason we're saying, let's slow this whole thing down. So I can come, if there's time, I'm happy to come back to some of this stuff. But let me move ahead. We've talked about 6 different items. Here's the 7th, and it's a big one. It's the environmental concerns that we have. They're a public utility, the Board of Light and Power, and because of that, you know, it's important that they listen to the community not only, but do what's best for the community. So most of Harbor Island, including the site that you see where the Sims plant has operated, most of that site is owned by the city, or in other words, by you, the citizens of Grand Haven. And the same is true of the Board of Light and Power. It's a public utility. And again, to be fair, to give credit where it's due, the Board of Light and Power voted to close that coal-operated Sims plant on Harbor Island. They also decided to purchase 100% of our power from the grid. And it also has specified that a high percentage of the power they're now purchasing, somewhere around 25% of the grid energy, must come from renewable sources. So in other words, they're saying to their provider from the grid, we want you to purchase energy that is produced by solar or produced by wind or some other way. And that's, you know, if we're going to purchase, 25% of that purchase has to come from those sources. So kudos to them. Since they decided to close Sims and did away with the operating costs, the people who are out there and so on, and purchased only from the grid where it is cheaper, Board of Light and Power has been able to save a good deal of money. Although that's true, as of now, the Board of Light and Power has not passed those savings on to its ratepayers. And it's kind of interesting coincidence. It just has happened that some of the neighboring communities, their power generators have offered lower rates. Well, Sims is gone, all right? No pollutants in the air anymore. So why are there still environmental concerns? Harbor Island is the site of a former dump, as most of you know. Coal and ash residuals, which you can see kind of in this slide, they have to be cleaned up and clear away. Coal ash contains arsenic, lead, mercury, and other heavy metals known to cause cancer, developmental disorders, and reproductive issues. So we want Harbor Island to be cleaned up properly, thoroughly, and in accord with the advice of the Environmental Protection Agency and Michigan's own Eagle agency. Another concern is the future and the current and the future high water level on Harbor Island. So on the slide that Andrea is projecting, you can see all the different things where it used to be impounded, areas that are normally dry that are wet, the normal water's edge, and another area over on the right side normally dry but flooded. So this is a concern. But here's another one. Those are the concerns we know about. Here's one you may not know about. If you read the February 19 Grand Haven Tribune article. So again, trying to be fair and use sources that are, I'm not speaking out of my own mouth. I'm using what the consultants have said, what they've told the Board of Light and Power, and in this case, what the Grand Haven Tribune has reported. And actually, this has been confirmed by the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, or EGLE as they like to be known. EGLE has confirmed that this article is accurate. So the Tribune looked at what correspondence between EGLE and EPA and the Board of Light and Power revealed. And very diplomatically, the Tribune reporter described that what the Board of Light and Power was saying publicly to us and what was revealed in those documents revealed, I'm quoting here from the Tribune, a discrepancy in information with what Board of Light and Power officials have spoken about. That's concerning. And as I say, this has been confirmed by the EGLE read the article. They said, yep, that's accurate. The same article points out Board of Light and Power was denied closure of one of its impoundments, and another Board of Light and Power request was deemed premature. And if you thought discrepancy in information was diplomatic, as I did, the article states less diplomatically, and I'm going to quote here, the BLP is, quote, in violation of Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Agency bylaws. That's a quote. And again, EGLE confirmed and said, yeah, that's accurate. So all this is going on. There's kind of a dispute now between Board of Light and Power about what should be done and how much should be done and at what cost, and EGLE and EPA. So here's another expenditure for you. To help them with that, the Board of Light and Power hired another consultant. This one is named Golder. Golder is an internationally recognized consulting firm that specializes in solving environmental problems. Golder has told the BLP that Harbor Island site is, quote, well, actually not a quote, I'm paraphrasing here. The Board of Light and Power, the Harbor Island site is the most complicated site they are dealing with in the USA. And Golder, so far, has not been able to resolve differences between the Board of Light and Power and the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, or EGLE. So Golder was trying to resolve those differences. They're doing this stuff. And here's another cost for you. To better argue their case, the Board of Light and Power continues to pay a Detroit environmental attorney named Arthur Siegel. And as it happens, Rotary didn't know this, but on the same day that I'm talking to you, tonight at 5:30, the Detroit attorney, the city attorney, the Board of Light and Power, and City Council meet to review these letters from EPA and EGLE. EPA and EGLE, of course, I don't think are going to be there. Well, moving ahead, part 8 is the last part before I get to the conclusion, is Board of Light and Power's proposed bond. So, how are they going to pay for all this stuff? You might ask. We're talking about a snowmelt system. We're talking about a new, what they call peaker plant. We're talking about a technical office building out there. We're talking about millions and millions of dollars. How are they going to pay for it? Well, they are proposing a bond. And you're seeing that it's the key ingredients are coming up. So in spite of the consultant's recommendation and advice, on October 15, 2020, the Board of Light and Power voted, you already know the vote, 3-2. October 15, 2020, 3-2 vote to proceed with their plan to build on Harbor Island and to finance construction and other costs with a $45 million bond issue. It's about $45 million. We don't know until they bring it forward. We don't know the actual cost. That bond with interest would be paid off during a 20-year time period. So a guy my age, I'm not going to live 20 more years and have to pay all that. But if my kids live here or my grandkids choose to live here, they're going to be stuck with it. So the revenue from the bond comes from the ratepayers. And here's a breakdown for you. I'm going to get a total of 47.9 million. You say, wait a minute, you just said 45. This is not necessarily what they're going to bond for. This is just some of what, leaving out the payment to the Detroit attorney, to the consultants, to the public relation firm, and so on. Here's what I come up with. $4 million for the electric substation. That's already done, it's there. $2 million for smart meters. That's already done. $1 million for the purchase and installation of snowmelt boilers. That's already done. $5.2 million for the demolition of Sims, which is almost done. Another $8 million for environmental cleanup after Sims. It's likely to be more than $8 million, but okay. $9.2 million for the tech office building. $18.5 million for a natural gas plant. That total comes to $47.9 million. And that doesn't include consultants, PR firm, and the other stuff. Interest on a bond over 20 years, I don't know. Maybe it's 2%, maybe it'll be higher. If it's 2%, that'd be about $10 million to tack on. Here's the interesting thing. Ultimately, it's the Grand Haven City Council that has to approve the bond. Since the power plant being proposed is not large enough to generate the majority of electricity that the council called for, I'm not sure about this, but I think the council would first have to rescind its own 2018 resolution. So when the Board of Light and Power comes to City Council can either approve it, and so far they have given no indication of fighting it. They can either approve it or they can pause it and take some time to more fully understand the full implication of the Board of Light and Power plan. The Board of Light and Power projects a return on investment. Some of the costs of this bond will be recouped by the savings of not having to purchase additional energy when the demand is very high. That's true if we assume the cost of buying energy from the grid rises every year. And that's an assumption. Some people say, yeah, the cost of energy is going to go up. Others say that's not necessarily true. Those saying it's not necessarily true include the consultants that Board of Light and Power hired. So it could go up, but there's no guarantee that it's going to go up. Board of Light and Power says, yeah, but look at all the coal-fired plants coming off. There's going to be less energy. And one answer to that is, look, consumer energy, just to take one example of an energy provider, consumer energy is investing money in Muskegon, the old, right around the old Muskegon wastewater. Remember they dumped they had a scheme to dump all the wastewater on soil and then they could grow crops there. That hasn't worked out so well. Consumer Power, maybe some of you know this, is proposing a 250 megawatt. We've been talking 36 megawatts maybe, and Board of Light and Power is 12.5. They're talking 250 megawatt solar plant in Muskegon. So that would be another, so Sims comes offline. At best, it could produce 74 megawatts. They're talking about replacing Sims and other plants like that with a 250 megawatt solar plant. So it's not clear whether energy costs are going to go up or going to come down as more people invest in solar, as one example, or wind. So let me try to wrap this up. I've presented 8 parts of the Harbor Island situation, or if you will, 8 very expensive pieces of a puzzle. They decided to involve a PR firm in their promotion of their plan. We looked at the city council resolution. Actually, that's one where there was no cost associated with it. We looked at the Burns and McDonald and PEC's recommendation, as well as the board minutes that suggest what a motive for BLP to want to bond was or is. We looked at the proposed new peaker plant. We looked at the proposed new office technical building. We looked at snow melt opportunities. We looked at the environmental cleanup of Harbor Island. And lastly, we looked at a $45 to $48 million bond proposal to finance everything. So one thing is clear to us, and I hope to all of you, no matter what else, the Board of Light and Power must do the environmental cleanup of Harbor Island. And it is our hope that, it is our thought that, since they are a public utility, they would respond to a public insistence that that island be cleaned up to Eagle and EPA specifications. Why are we fighting them? Let's say, okay, you're the experts, you tell us what we need to do to get this thing cleaned up so we don't have to worry about it. So beyond that, we have some other options that we could look into. And I want to be clear, the Board of Light and Power, the Grand Haven Energy Organization is not saying to the Board of Light and Power, you have to get off of Harbor Island completely. They already have an existing new substation and power lines. It's fine, those should stay. The question is, what else, if anything, should you be doing out there? What we're urging, the Grand Haven Energy Organization, is that we slow everything down and take the option that the Board of Light and Power's own consultant recommended years ago in 2018, and that is to pause for several years and, quote, investigate the definition of the project and reflect on the priorities of the community. The priorities of the community. How could they continue to investigate the definition of the project and consider the priorities of the community? Well, how could they do that? How could they continue to investigate? The whole project, in our opinion, the whole project should be given a second look by consultants not selected by the Board of Light and Power, but selected instead by the business community. Again, what you tell them is what you're going to get back. So we would prefer to have business industry say, here's the consultant we want from the outside, and we are going to ask them to take into account financial implications, environmental implications, and consideration of the changes that are taking place in renewable energy and in energy storage systems. Put it differently, we believe some good old-fashioned due diligence is long overdue. Well, that's how they could investigate the definition of the project. But what are the priorities they should reflect on? What are these community priorities? I'll give you an idea. We think, the Grand Haven Energy Organization thinks, the priorities include the project should be economically and fiscally responsible for our community and the ratepayers. The project should reflect environmental responsibility. The island should be cleaned up, meeting the environmental laws of Michigan, just like any industry would have to do. We don't want litigation for years to delay this cleanup. And the scope of the project should include consideration of what Burns and McDonald called, quote, the use of emerging technologies such as local solar and energy storage, quote. Isn't it surprising what they talked about as emerging technologies just in 2018, 3 years ago? Those emerging technologies are already here. Things are changing rapidly. Well, what can you do? You people who have been kind enough to listen to all this, what can you do? Let your friends and neighbors know what you've learned. Let the city council know what you think about this. Let them know if you support what we're saying. Let them know. Let's take a pause. This is so important. This is probably the most important issue that Grand Haven has faced for decades. So please give it your careful consideration. You, and I would say the same to the Board of Light and Power, and I would say the same to the City Council. This is too important to just paper over and get through it. So I want to thank you. You've all, I can't see your faces, and that's a handicap. I hope I have provided some information, maybe some new information. I hope that I have been true to the Rotary questions, because that's a great set of questions. And I look forward to as many questions. It looks like we have maybe 10 minutes, and I apologize. I really, well, personal reason, I need to get to Grand Haven. I have to leave.
Yeah, we are a bit over, but if you are able to stick around for a few minutes, and if we could squeeze a couple in here,
Sure.
and leave a little bit before 1:30 here. Andy, I see you kind of waving your hand there. Go ahead.
Yeah, John, I'm new to Michigan. I've only moved here a month ago, but I'm curious if there's a state energy department or board and or Department of Natural Resources that has to sign off on any final plan here. And if so, is there a clear role that those state agencies play in the decision-making process as you go forward?
Yeah. Andy, it's a great question, and I'm glad you're back in Michigan. The answer is, a quick answer is, we went through the EPA and EGLE, the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, as it used to be called. They are looking at Harbor Island as a contaminated site, and they're saying it has to be cleaned up. And we realize Board of Light and Power back in the day, this is not on Dave Walters, back in the day did not put away the money they should have to affect the cleanup that is required. So yeah, they do have a hand, and they do have a say. And you know, it's our belief that Board of Light and Power should sit down with them and say, okay, what do we have to do? Let's do this right. Let's have this island available for future generations to enjoy. It's right on the river. We're a riverfront community, a lakefront community. That's potentially valuable property to this community. Let's get it cleaned up. So yeah, they can, EPA can, and they already have been, delaying this process a little bit.
Thank you.
Anyway, good question.
I think we got time for one or two more. If anyone wants to jump in, go ahead and unmute yourself. And
I've got
fire
one,
away.
Kevin.
Yeah.
Yep, Kevin, this is Bill Van Lopik. My question is, the 13 million unfunded liability,
Yeah.
is that for environmental remediation and therefore is included in the $45 million bond issuance? It's going to be one of the uses from that.
Yeah, Bill, it's a great question, and you were a good listener. I appreciate that. Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, you know, the question in effect is, how in the world are we going to finance this? This is what Dave was saying to the board from the board minutes I read. Dave was saying, how are we going to finance this? We could take out a short-term loan. I'm not sure we want to do that. We could pay cash, or you know what? We could roll this into a bigger issue. If we put some buildings out there, then we can bond. If we're bonding for building, we can just roll this other stuff in. We can also roll snow melt in. It's a beautiful world. I don't mean to be sarcastic. I've been talking too long, you can tell. But anyway, yeah, that's the answer.
So that 13 million's in the 45.
The 13.2 was in the 45, yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, one more. All right.
Well, Kevin, I just want to
Yeah.
say something. I'm the city manager in Grand Haven, and typically I'm pretty verbose about just about everything, but you'll all agree with that. When it comes to BLP, the charter has a specific provision that the city manager has nothing to do with what goes on at the BLP, and for whatever reason, the voters put that in place in 1959. So that's where I'm at on this, but happy to talk about any of these issues with anyone. John, I appreciate your time and your perspective. It's very enlightening for me to hear a lot of this. On the snow melt issue,
Yeah.
it is intended to be reimbursed by the users of that. They so far paid for everything having to do with the snow melt, from the initial construction through all the operating expenses and this $1 million expense that's been paid for at this point by BLP. But the intent is that the snow melt users will be reimbursing that 100%. So it's a bit of a red herring, or an issue that sort of incites a little bit of emotion, I'm afraid. But I don't think that tying that in real closely, I mean, the boilers are there, and one way or another, we're going to find a way. The BLP, the city, the DDA are very committed to discovering a way to affordably work that into the outcome, whatever that outcome is. But at no time are we saying, hey, we're wanting to just kind of roll that into a bond issue and make everybody forget about it. Not the case. And everybody's been pretty clear about that. And what I lay awake at night worrying about, and it's totally irrelevant that I wasn't even alive when that stuff was put out on the island, the dump.
Yeah.
Irrelevant. I'm the city manager today, and it's my job to deal with it and take care of it. And that's what we're going to do. We will find a way, as John put it very clearly and cleanly, and I appreciate it. And it's my biggest takeaway is we have to clean that area up so that it's not a threat to human health. It's not a threat to the environment. And I'll put in third place deliberately, but certainly almost as important as those other two, that it doesn't bankrupt us. And I think we can do that. I think we can find a way to protect the public health, protect the environment, and do it in a financially responsible way with our partners at Eagle, EPA, and BLP. It's very doable, and I look forward, and Grand Haven Energy Organization too. I think they'll be committed to those same goals. So I appreciate that, John.
Thank you. I'm not sure I heard a question in there, Pat, but I would agree with you about snowmelt. That it is a bit of a red herring, and some people only see that and think it's all connected. That's why I said earlier, I think this really is a separable issue and one that needs to be looked at. So far as I know, however, Board of Light and Power does intend, they may see this as good news if the city or the downtown is going to pick up the 1 million. But I think their plan at this point is to include the 1 million as part of the bond issue. But I could be wrong. I don't know. I'm quite confident in what I say. So the other thing that I would say, Pat, since we're not asking each other questions, is I wish you were not saddled with the role that that somebody has given you on this issue. Kind of involved, but silently so. So, be good to hear your voice. Anyway, let me thank Rotary. I wish, like I say, I wish I could see I wish I could have seen your faces. Much preferred talking face to face. But from what I can tell, you are a sensational group, a brilliant group. I love the work that you're doing. Keep doing that, whether it's Honduras or right here in Grand Haven. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you, John. And thank you, everyone else. Thanks for sticking around longer for it. So thanks, John.
My pleasure.
All right. With that, I think Matt had already dropped, so I'll wrap us up with the 4-way test. So, is it the truth?
Is it
Is
fair,
it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Is it beneficial to all concerned?
All concerned.